So when Fabrizio asked me to present you something, I decided to do something new for me and to think about and to put in a presentation a concept that a little bit changed my entrepreneurial life. And therefore, I'll try to present it to you, and I would be super happy if I'm able to convince you about one concept. It's very easy. One concept. If I do it, the rest of the presentation is not so relevant, okay? So, let's, where is it? Okay. Let's look at this image, no? Think about a pipe. No? Normally we are used to a normal pipe where the section is equal all along the pipe. Okay, now think a little bit about a pipe where the section changed, something like that. And you want to push water inside the pipe, and you want to have the water going at maximum speed. You have a certain pressure on one side, okay? Now the question is on what the speed of the water depends on. Look at the pipe. On what the speed of the water going through depends on, in your opinion?
Pressure.
Pressure is fixed, is P. Okay, if we go up with the pressure, most likely it goes.
Temperature?
Temperature, yes, but a little.
On the bottleneck.
Okay, on the bottleneck. Other opinions? Okay, right, but we cannot really change the material we are using, okay?
The smallest section.
Okay, the smallest, that is the bottleneck. Now, it seems a very easy answer and something not so relevant, but think about it, no? The speed depends only on the bottleneck. Only on this section. What does it mean that it depends only on that section? It means that if you want to have the water going at higher speed, the only thing that you should do is to enlarge the bottleneck. And there is also another concept. If you work on a different part of the pipe, you are spending money and you are not having higher speed. This is an interesting concept for a startup. Okay, so if you work here or here, you can do whatever you want, but the speed is the same, nothing changes. You're spending money because for enlarging other part of the pipe, you need somehow to invest or do things or whatever. Okay, so this is the only concept that I would like you to go home this night. All the rest is simply talking about this concept, going a little bit into startups and other stuff, okay? Good. Now, the speed of what in startups? Now, I placed here some possible stuff you may use, okay? Total income, EBITDA, for whoever knows what it is, number of users, number of paying users, free cash flow. That's something that in startups, it's like something we cannot use. Valuation of the company, total valuation of the company, or valuation for the founders, that is a different concept. Return on equity, return on investment, IRR, internal rate of return, learning for the team, quality of life for the team. You are in Sondrio, so quality of the life, I'm sure it's something you decided to have coming here, no? Or add the measure you think are the most important ones for you. Doesn't matter. Or it matters a lot. But the first point is to decide which one of these is the measure you want to maximize in speed. Okay? For me, when I do startups, the one I use is valuation of the company. Okay? Why? Because it's a very abstract concept. It has into it a lot of stuff. The market, investors, EBITDA, somehow income, multipliers. All these things somehow are into the valuation. Okay? Now, what are the possible sources of bottlenecks in a startup? There are a bunch of it. They are everywhere. Okay? Of course, the first is poor product market fit. But you can have excessive cash burn. It's very problematic stuff for a startup. No? You are finishing your cash and you don't have in sight any new investment coming in. Lack of technical expertise, ineffective sales pipelines, regulatory challenges, supply chain distributions, non-competitive market position, limited operational space, physical space, scarce key resources. Afterwards, I will tell you about my previous startups where we had a very specific point on this. And many other potential bottlenecks. Now, bottlenecks may be everywhere, and they may be in different forms. Sometimes it's about money, sometimes it's about people, sometimes it's about technology. And therefore, finding out bottlenecks, it's a kind of mix between science and art. So you need somehow a process for discovering it, even if it's between science and art, okay? So conceptually, for discovering a bottleneck, you need a digital twin of your company. I say conceptually because creating a digital twin of a company is a very complex issue. As you maybe know, because you are trying to create a digital twin of a physical space, but somehow the concept is, if you have the digital twin of your system, the bottleneck is the parameter the change most significantly affects the speed. So if you change that parameter a little bit more, a little bit less, the speed change abruptly. That is the bottleneck. Okay? Now the problem is that you may have a company that is a system that somehow is linear, is the most easy one. If you have a linear system, the bottleneck is simply the parameter that influences more what you are doing. But that is the easy stuff. The real world is more non-linear, analytical system, so you can calculate it somehow. Let's say with an Excel, with some normal calculations. But more complex may be a stochastic system, so you have a distribution of results given a certain parameters, and that is a little bit more complex because for having the measure of that distribution, you need time. You need to do a lot of stuff. But in reality, the majority of cases is a complex system that is a black box. A black box is something where you don't know how to calculate it. You have a black box, you have input and output. Okay? And so the only thing you can really do in a complex system, so what is a complex system? Sorry, is a network of diverse interconnected elements whose interactions yield emergent, unpredictable, and non-linear behaviors that cannot be fully understood by examining its part in isolation. Okay? I give you one example, a very easy example of a complex system. Take a circle, and you divide the circle in millions of spaces. In each space, you may have a dot in it or not. Then you place a certain density of that dots, and you put on it a certain dynamics. So for example, if there is a dot in front of it, the dot cannot go on. If it's empty, it can go on. And then you start switching on the system. If the density is very low, what is happening is that the dots goes around like this without any problem. If you go up in density, at a certain point, you start having a system that does like this, like you have in motorway with your car sometimes. If you go up with the density, at a certain point, everything stops. Was it possible to forecast this simply by the rules of the single elements? No, it was not possible. Only doing it, only going into the complex system, you see the emergent stuff, okay? So the only way for understanding a complex system is to use a black box conceptualization. So you have a black box, you put certain input, and you look at the outputs. You put other inputs, and you look at other outputs. And doing like this, you discover somehow how it works, this black box. Okay? That's the concept. Of course, you have two different kinds of decisions. This is a Jeff Bezos famous stuff, no? One-way door choices or two-way doors. The one-way door is a decision that you cannot, where you cannot make mistakes, because it kills you. It kills your company. Okay? Two-way doors are decisions in which you can try, fail, and go back. Okay? So for discovering what is inside the black box, of course, you can only use the two-way door decisions. Because if you start using the one-way door, you have one shot, and then you're dead. Okay? So of course, whoever did or does a startup knows that it's about trying, failing, understanding, go back, retrying, failing, understanding, go back, continuously. Okay? And so the idea is you have to find out your bottleneck first. Why? Because, for this reason. Because if you don't work on the bottleneck and you're working on something else, you are spending money, but your speed is the same. So simple, so easy to understand, okay? So, but for working on the bottleneck, you have to know which one is it, okay? And this, difficult stuff. And then you have 5 steps for working on it. So, the first is identify it, identify the constraints. Examine all potential sources and pinpoint the single bottleneck. Okay? Then, after it, you determine how to overcome it. So what can you do on that bottleneck? And of course, it depends on the bottleneck. Afterwards, I will give you one example on a startup I did it. But of course, different bottlenecks requires different ways to overcome it, to work on it. Then you have to align the team and the processes on the bottleneck. Typically all the team in a startup, because in a startup you are 2, 3, 4 people. I mean, you are not 20, 50, 60 people. And so all the team should be aware of it and should work on it. You have to invest resources, so allocate resources on the bottleneck, on opening up the bottleneck, and implements a solution. And then you have to avoid inertia. So you have to avoid not doing something. So regularly review and adjust your strategy. Why? Because sometime you may have overcome this bottleneck, okay? And what happened when you have overcome this bottleneck?
The next bottleneck.
The next bottleneck. In fact, this is exactly the point. Okay? Another bottleneck emerges. Look, this is a way to work completely different compared to big companies. Big companies have roles, people is in that role, work on that, and that's it. In startups, this way to work, it means that you have to jump from one bottleneck to the other. To spend enough time for overcome it, and then afterwards jump on the next bottleneck. I worked in this way, and you can be sure that people are not used to it. No? Many people think that is kind of crazy. How was that yesterday you were so mad at it, at this, and today you are mad at that? It's about your psychological capabilities, or it's about the company? This is the typical structure of a relationship you may have if you work in this way. Okay? Good. Example from Sant'Agostino. Sant'Agostino was a bunch of clinical centers, physical clinical centers. So we had doctors inside spaces delivering services like specialistic visits, magnetic resonance, blood testing, dentistry, physiotherapy, or whatever. Okay? This was our job. I worked there for 14 years, so a long period of time. Okay? During those years, I had only those 4 bottlenecks. In each moment, one of that bottleneck was the most important one. Market. Market meant for us that we had spaces, we had the doctors inside the spaces, but they were not full. They had spaces for patients. We didn't have all the agendas full with patients. Therefore, the bottleneck in that moment was the market. So, what you should do when the bottleneck is the market?
Expanding adjacent markets.
How?
Adding services.
No?
Marketing.
Right. Marketing, commercial stuff, investing in digital marketing or whatever. What works? Okay? One of our problems is that the main point for us that was working was word of mouth. And so it's not so easy to expand word of mouth with money. It's very difficult to put money there and to have more market. Okay, you can do it a little bit, but not so much. But anyhow, we had certain periods in which market was the bottleneck. Other periods, like the last one, between 2018 and 2024, where the bottleneck were doctors. We had space. We had all the agendas full, but we were not able to bring in more doctors, specialized people working for us. Why? Because in the meantime, there were decoupling between the number of doctors going to pensions and the number of doctors coming in from university. And other complex healthcare issues. Then I had certain periods in which I had the market, I had the doctors, but I didn't have enough clinical centers. I had to open up new clinical centers. You know what I was doing during that period? I was asking to all my team, come over here, let's divide Milan, in that moment was the city where we had the market, let's divide Milan in several spaces, go out of the office, walk in the streets and find out where we can open a clinical center. Come back, and typically in 3 days, we had several possibilities jumping in. Okay? And the last one, money. So, okay, we also find out where we want to open a new clinical center, but we don't have enough money for the investment. So we have to get more money from investors if we want to grow up. Okay? So in 14 years, I was jumping from one to the other continuously. And every time when from one bottleneck to the other, the situation changed, all the organization changed. Okay? Rules of the people, amount of people. When in the last period, when doctors were the problem, we built up an office with a lot of people doing recruiting. Only that. Before, we didn't have a recruiting office. We were receiving CVs from doctors easy. They wanted to work with us. Okay? So this is an example in a specific case, a specific startup, of the bottlenecks we had. Okay? Good. If you want to go deep into what I told you, there's one book that is Focused Operations Management, Achieving More with Existing Resources. In Italian, the book is Rinnovare l'azienda a costo zero. In my opinion, it's a fantastic book. It changed my vision of how to do business. So I strongly suggest you, if you are a startupper, to take it and read it very carefully. And here you have my email if you want to write me.